Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Monday, August 7th. What's up, guys? Been a minute. I did miss a week on you there. I'm sorry. Believe it or not, I'm not getting paid for this quite yet, so it can't be a full-time priority for me, but I do care deeply about this podcast. I hope you guys will forgive me. Did have to do some traveling for work. Couldn't pack this bulky microphone here. Couldn't bring it with me to record a pod on the road, so couldn't get you an episode last week, but good thing there's exactly been one piece of news since we last spoke. Haven't missed much, so there wasn't any desperate need to get off some NBA takes off my chest, but we did have one big piece of news. So I will get into that in a second. Did want to let you guys know that, of course, as you're seeing in the title, today's episode is going to be ranking the top 10 wings in the NBA headed into next season, obviously continuing the theme of our past couple episodes here. Like I talked about before, we did the point guards previously, we did shooting guards the last episode. Now we are coming at you with the wings, which we are going to get into in just one second. But of course, we got to talk about the one NBA storyline that I missed since my last podcast, and that is my guy, Jaylen Brown of the Boston Celtics, getting paid. It's about time. Jaylen Brown got paid the largest contract, the most lucrative contract in NBA history, I should say. 5 years, $304 million. And if you guys are wondering, Nick, how do you feel about this? That is a lot of money to pay to a guy with one hand on the basketball court. I'm still pretty happy about it, guys. As I said before, I wanted the Celtics to come out and pay Jaylen Brown. Not even as much to say as he is deserving of the largest contract in NBA history. Obviously, I like the guy. Even I don't believe that. But it is just much better than what the other options of how this could have played out would be, right? I know I've talked about this a little bit, but just to give you my complete take on the situation, right? Obviously, I was pretty frustrated with how the season ended. I certainly wasn't happy with Jaylen Brown. I definitely had some real, question marks about, if this team could eventually win the whole thing with Tatum and Brown as their two best players after how things ended against the Heat. Obviously, Tatum got hurt in that Game 7. Jaylen had an absolutely nightmare game. And, afterward, even then, I was still like, I think you have to re-sign him. And then, as time has gone on over the past couple months here, I've definitely doubled down on that take. And, it's really just because what other options could you have had from this situation, right? I guess, if you really want to play hardball and you don't think Jaylen's worthy of a max contract, you can, try to offer him a lower contract and risk pissing him off heading into next season. And I can't imagine him and his agents were going to sign for anything less than the amount of money that they signed for. That being said, you could, then try to trade him, right? And then see how that goes in the offseason. And but the tricky thing is look, whether you like the Celtics as much as I do or not, you have to admit that they are contending for a championship. They've made it to the conference finals several times with this current core. They made it to the NBA finals 2 seasons ago at this point. They are firmly in the contender conversation, and they have a guy who I believe is a top 10 player at the minimum in Jason Tatum, who's entering the prime of his career, I should add as well, right? Like, when you have a core that is that competitive, when you have a player that is that special in Tatum, you don't really want to mess around the edges and risk bringing somebody into your building that doesn't fit that timeline and isn't ready to contend right away. Can you trade him for a guy like Damian Lillard and, maybe shorten the timeline of the team a little bit to raise the ceiling for next season? Yeah, I guess you could. I wouldn't want to see them do that, right? For me, I did want to see the Celtics shake things up because I had some real questions, after how things ended the Heat, and I feel like they already made their big splash move in the Marcus Smart, Kristaps Porzingis trade that we've talked about before. So I was very nervous that they hadn't paid Jaylen at the time I recorded my last episode. I know he was headed to Europe for some of his duties pertaining to being on vice president of the Players Association or something like that. So I was overjoyed to see him get that money. It was a little bit startling to again see that contract start with the number 3, $300 million that is, for a guy that again is struggled with ball handling in a pretty significant way over the past couple seasons. But I believe in the guy. There should be no issues whatsoever about his happiness heading into next season. I don't care that we might have mentioned him in trade rumors for Kevin Durant last offseason. I do not care that we waited a full month into free agency to offer him that contract. He was offered the largest contract in NBA history. He accepted and signed that contract. So now all we can do as Celtics fans is hope that they have retooled the roster enough around Tatum and Brown to compete again next season, and just hope that we don't end up like people in Portland right now and have our superstar ask out of a trade because, I guess you're just screwed no matter who your guys are and what the contract situation looks like if that happens to you and your star player gets upset. So hopefully our stars are happy now. I'm sure Tatum's happy with this news as well. And good for Jaylen Brown, well-deserved. And we'll see how things look for the Celtics heading into next season. All right, let's get into it, shall we? Top 10 wings in the NBA heading into next season. My quick disclaimers, I should say, that I've done at the start of every episode. Again, this is not taking into account the contract of the players. It is not taking into account the age of the players. It is just in a vacuum. Who are the 10 best wings in the NBA heading into next season? That is all I will say on that. And this was a pretty tough list. I think this was probably the hardest list I had to make. The shooting guard list was difficult because it was pretty ugly. I was like, who do I want to spend 5 minutes talking about at the bottom of this list, right? Whereas the wings, I definitely don't think we have this issue, but I don't want to give away too much, but for me, it was just like, how much do you value availability? How much do you value health of these players? Because we have some major health question marks that we're going to dive into a little bit as we get further up this list. But let me start off with one last disclaimer, and that is, I did not put Giannis on this list, not because I don't think he's talented enough to make the top 10 wings in the NBA. I just kind of consider him more of a big man that is. Again, the next list and the final list of this series that we're going to do is probably going to be next episode. We'll be doing ranking the top 10 big men in the NBA. Again, just kind of feel like positions are dying as a whole. There's not really small forwards and power forwards like there used to be, 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? So I just went wing and big for the front court players just to make things easier. And I do just think that Giannis, he doesn't really fit either, right? He's a freak. He's one of the top two player in the entire league and one of the best players I've ever seen in my life of watching basketball. He's an absolute freak. I just think if I really, gun to my head, had to say, is Giannis a wing? Is Giannis a big? I'd probably say he's a big, right? He's 7 feet tall. He averaged 19 points per game just from scoring in the paint alone last season. He's dominant around the basket. And I think that that's just where I want to put him. And again, the big man list is probably going to be a little bit weaker than the wing list anyway. So if I can talk about Giannis for 5 minutes next episode instead of talking about Jonas Valanciunas, that's what I'm going to do. All right. So just bear with me. I know these lists aren't perfect, but they are my opinion. I put some time and effort into creating these. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. So now that I disclaimed again, Giannis not eligible on this list. He will be on the big man list next episode. Honorable mentions, all right? Got a couple names here that I think are all worth mentioning. First and foremost, the guy that I was closest to putting on this list, I went back and forth in the 10 spot, Pascal Siakam. He's not my favorite player, right? He's, 29 years old. He's been on the Raptors his entire career. He's an NBA champion as part of the 2019 Raptors team that ended up knocking off Golden State. I like Siakam. I can't say I like Siakam. I respect Siakam, right? He plays, 40-something minutes a game because under Nick Nurse, he never really plays his subs, right? He's a solid two-way player. Again, we've kind of seen how it plays out if Pascal Siakam's your best player the past couple seasons, right? The Raptors haven't been overly successful. They didn't even make it out of the play-in tournament this past season. So, again, I like Siakam. He's solid, but I think we know what he is at this point. I don't think he's got that elite ceiling. But if you want to argue him for number 10 when we get to that spot, I totally get it. There's probably some Raptors fans that think I'm crazy for the guy I have at number 10 over him, but I couldn't get there with Siakam. I haven't seen enough development on the offensive end of the court, and I just don't think he has that elite ceiling. Another honorable mention is Mikal Bridges of the Brooklyn Nets. Most recently, obviously, he got traded at the deadline from Phoenix over to Brooklyn. I like Bridges. He was really special during that end of the season run with Brooklyn, right? I just think it was too small of a sample size for me to put him there, right? Obviously, his usage rate probably doubled, maybe even tripled going from Phoenix over to Brooklyn. And he showed that he was, really capable of being a legitimate two-way star. We knew that he was kind of an elite defender in Phoenix, right? Just kind of had the job of locking down the opposing team's best player and, hitting some open shots, but he proved there was a lot more to his offensive game once he got to Brooklyn. Again, just too small of a sample size, couldn't get there with him. Another guy I talked briefly about last episode because he wasn't eligible on the shooting guard list, that was DeMar DeRozan. Really like DeMar. I know he got some weird MVP buzz a couple seasons ago when the Bulls were way more competitive than people thought. I love him. I love his game. I love that he's probably still a top 3 mid-range scorer in the league, and maybe even in the league's history, he's probably top 10 in that category. He really is that special, creating his own shot in the mid-range. But again, he just doesn't give you a ton defensively. He's getting up there in age. The three-point shooting's better than what it was early career, but it's still nothing great. I just couldn't get there on DeRozan. And then 2 other honorable mentions: the Young Bucks in Orlando, Paolo Banchero, the number 1 overall pick last year, as well as Franz Wagner. Those guys are extremely fun to watch. They're two-way players. They can both hit shots at a high level, and I think the sky's the limit, especially for Paolo. I'd be shocked if he's not on this list come the end of next season. So maybe I should just project a little bit and put him at 10. But it did feel a little bit disrespectful to the guys that we already have on this list. So I couldn't quite get there with the Orlando guys. But again, Paulo and Franz also honorable mention. Let's get into it. Top 10 wings in the NBA heading into next season. We've gone through the honorable mentions. Let's get to my guy at number 10. This one was a pick for me, right? This is one of my guys. You guys can laugh. You guys can make fun of me. You can say everybody I mentioned the honorable mentions is better than this guy. And I probably couldn't make the largest argument against that, right? It wouldn't be the most passionate argument I've ever made. But at number 10, this is where I had Lauri Markkanen, right? I just really had a lot of fun watching the Utah Jazz at the beginning of last season. Weirdly caught a ton of their games on League Pass. And Lauri Markkanen, of course, winner of the Most Improved Award last season, made a massive, massive jump. I think his points per game increased by like 12 or 13 points. 26 points a game last season, and again, I am going to provide stats for all of these players, right? I am going to just provide points, rebounds, assists, as well as their shooting percentages for the regular season last year. Not that I'm basing the entire list off of those stats, but just to provide a little bit of context for these players. 26 points per game, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, 50% shooting from the field, and 39% shooting from deep. He's just a really fascinating player to watch. Like, again, even though Giannis isn't eligible for this list because I consider him a big, Lauri Markkanen does definitely play more like a wing despite being 7 feet tall. But I think he's such a fascinating player. He can slash at a really high level. He can kind of create his own shot. He still shoots the ball at a really high clip. And then on the defensive end of the court, he can guard other teams' fives because, again, he's 7 feet tall. Now, the biggest gripe you could say about that is, look, he was on the Utah Jazz that did not even make the play-in tournament. But again, as somebody who did watch a lot of Utah last season, they just kind of cut things off right a little bit after the trade deadline, right? Like, again, it was in their best interest to lose because of the timeline of their team, right? They're trying to accumulate as many high draft picks as humanly possible. Danny Ainge, probably pulled the plug on their little bit of a Cinderella run that they had going to start last season. And so they probably intentionally tried to lose a couple of those games down the stretch. But Lauri Markkanen was the best player on a team that was in the middle of the pack in the Western Conference for the majority of last season. So, again, if you want to put Pascal Siakam and Mikal Bridges and whoever else above him, I get it. I just really like Lauri's game. If I was a general manager heading into next season, I'd rather have Lauri Markkanen on my team than Siakam, than Bridges just for next season. Because I think you can get really cute with him too, right? Like, again, he's 7 feet tall. If you really wanted him to play the 5, at least defensively, right, and just throw him out there with a bunch of wings, and then, offensively they're going to be really difficult to guard because he can blow by a lot of the bigs in the NBA. I think you could do stuff like that, and at the bare minimum, you're getting somebody that's really special athletically and can shoot the ball at a 40% clip at 7 feet tall. Sign me up for that any day of the week. I love Lauri Markkanen. Moving on to number 9, a guy that's been in a lot of offseason storylines for maybe not the wrong reasons, but certainly not the right reasons either. This is where I had Zion Williamson, right? This is, again, the injuries play such a big role into this list. I don't want to spend the entire time talking about injuries, but I think we know the deal with Zion at this point in the injuries, right? He played in 29 games last season. He played in 0 games the season before. He played in 61 games his second year in the league, right? His really closest thing he's put out to a full season, of course, and then in his rookie year only played in 24 games. But the reason why he's still on this list at all is because of how special Zion is, right? Statistically, 26 points per game last season, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 61% shooting from the field, dude. Like, the guy he just doesn't miss. He doesn't miss because he's quite literally one of the most efficient scorers we've ever seen in NBA history. Again, extremely small sample size, but he's unstoppable when he's out there. And he even shot 37% from 3 last season. Now, again, only 29 games. He only shot a handful of them per game. So I don't really want to buy into the Zion jump shot stock quite yet, but I am just buying in on the talent of Zion Williamson. He would easily be, top 5, maybe even in the entire league if he just stays healthy and could play in at least 70 games. That doesn't really seem like it's going to happen anytime soon because Zion's got to get his act together physically, right? He's got to, put in the work to invest in his body like guys like LeBron James do just to stay out there on the court because he's a special player, and he's got a really special set of skills where, like, again, he's 6'7", probably pushing 300 pounds, and, still has, easily a 40-inch vertical. Like, guys just cannot match up with him. He overpowers guys that are 4 or 5 inches taller than him. He jumps off the gym. Doesn't really matter what he's weighing in at. He still finds a way to produce on the court, and those stats that I read to you have basically been identical his entire, 4-year career, right? He's just really special. It's just a matter of if he can stay on the court or not. I wouldn't exactly bet on Zion, but I would tell you if I knew he was playing in 60-plus games next season, he'd be a hell of a lot higher than number 9 on this list. Moving on to number 8, got a fellow podcaster, Podcast P, if you will. This is where I had Paul George. Shout out my guy Brendan. If he was the one making this list, he'd probably have him up in the top 3 because he really, maybe he's just too big of a fan of his podcast. I don't really know. I like Paul George, right? I think I like the idea of Paul George, again, similar to Zion when he's on the court. Statistically for him, 24 points per game, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 46% shooting from the field, 37% shooting from deep. He did play in 56 games last season, which I was a little surprised at. I thought it was less than that. He actually played in one more game than LeBron did last season, but I think it just felt like he missed more because he missed the entire end of the regular season and then obviously all of the playoffs as well. He did play in only 31 games the year prior and 54 games the year before that. So it's been a while since we saw a solid 60 plus game season out of Paul George, probably since 2018 when he was in the MVP conversation with OKC. He's still the prototypical wing in the NBA. He just is, right? He's 6'9", 6'10", incredible athleticism. He's one of the smoothest guys in the NBA to watch, too. He's got his bag has a bag, as Mark Jones would say, right? I like the game. Great shooter, can guard the other team's best player as well. But again, we just haven't seen it from him in a couple years, and at some point I have to take into account availability on this list, and that's why I'm slotting Paul George in at number 8. Moving on, number 7. This is a teammate of Zion Williamson. This is where I had Brandon Ingram. Now, it was tricky. Again, this was a very difficult list to make. He only played in 45 games last season himself, but in general, he's been healthier than guys like Paul George and Zion over the past couple seasons, so I am kind of giving him a nod above those guys on the list, even though talent-wise, when healthy, I don't know if he's as good as a Paul George or certainly not as a Zion, but I do like Brandon Ingram. I really respect his game. I had a lot of fun watching the Pelicans, especially at the start of last season. Statistically, he put up 25 points per game, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 48% shooting from the field, 39% shooting from deep. He was really awesome down the stretch last season, too, right? When he did get healthy toward the end of the regular season, I was really impressed with his ability to close games. I feel like he took a major step forward. Again, he's definitely in the shadow of Zion and just in a shadow in general since getting traded away from the Lakers, right? He doesn't get a lot of hype, but again, exactly what you'd want in a wing. He still defends at a decently high level. You'd like to see him get a little bit stronger to hold up better on the perimeter, or on the interior, rather. But I like Brandon Ingram. I think he is definitely somebody that can keep your team afloat and somebody consistent that they need to have alongside a guy like Zion. So feel pretty comfortable giving him the nod over guys like Paul George and Zion, and I had him slotted in at number 7. At number 6, a guy we talked about a lot earlier. Of course, this is where I had Jaylen Brown. Now, I'm not really taking into account tiers too much when it comes to this list, right? Because it's just so hard with the injuries and the guys that are so often injured that we're going to be talking about in this list. And hint, hint, we're not done yet. We got at least one more guy that's often injured to talk about. But Jaylen Brown, obviously a guy near and dear to my heart. 27 points per game, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, 49% shooting from the field, and 34% shooting from deep. I just think that, again, there would be a tier jump in between Brandon Ingram and Jaylen Brown. I think Jaylen Brown is just a little bit more, definitely a bit more athletic, definitely a little bit more consistent. He's been in a lot bigger games with how many playoff runs the Celtics have had the past couple seasons. Now, the negatives, we know what they are, right? He still can't dribble to save his life. I think the shot selection is pretty questionable. 34% shooting from 3 isn't bad by any means, but honestly, I felt like that should be higher. It probably just comes down to his shot selection a little bit. I think he just settles for really difficult shots much more than he should, and people don't really talk about that enough. But you can't really nitpick a guy that plays in a ton of games each and every year, can take over a game with his athleticism, can just really dominate from the defensive end of the court as well. He can really lock up when he has to, when he's interested and engaged. Hopefully, $304 million has something to say about how engaged he is next season. But I like Jaylen Brown. I think he's just more available than the guys we talked previously on this list, but he doesn't have the elite ceiling of the guys that we are going to talk about in the top 5. And at number 5, again, the final, true injury bug player that we're going to be talking about today, Kawhi Leonard, right? 24 points per game last season, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, 51% shooting from the field, and 42% shooting from 3. Now, he did muster up 52 games last season. He did play 0 the season before that and 52 the season prior to that. So that's just kind of what we're looking at for Kawhi. 104 regular season games over the last 3 years. Not great, not what you want to see. But did you guys watch the playoffs, right? Did you watch the handful of games, the 3-4 games that Kawhi Leonard played in against the Suns? Maybe I'm looking too far into that, but again, he was playing against a very talented team in Phoenix, and he looked like far and away the best player on the court in those games against Phoenix. They split the first 2 games, and I think he got hurt in the third game, right? I'm not sure if he ended up playing in that one or what, but Man, there's no doubt that Kawhi is still, at least the same guy offensively that he was a couple years ago. I think he might even be better offensively. Now, defensively, he's probably hit a little bit of a decline, right? He's probably not the same, the claw, if you will, that we saw in San Antonio and maybe even Toronto. But offensively, man, he could still just get to his shot in the mid-range more efficiently and smoother than ever before. Like, he really is incredible. I love his game, and he has that elite ceiling, and he is the reason why idiots like myself get sucked into the Clippers each and every, March and April, right? Because, hey, if this is the year that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are healthy, like, they could win the whole thing, and that's really not crazy talk right there. But the reality of the situation is we just have not seen that at all, right? We haven't seen either of those guys really be on the court, let alone both of them. But I do just think that Kawhi Leonard, because he has the ability to not just be a top 5 player on this list, but a top 5 player in the entire league, like, I had to give him the nod above a guy like Jaylen Brown. Like, Kawhi Leonard's been the best player on at least one, maybe two different championship teams. He has that pedigree. He's gotten it done at every level. He's not fazed by difficult situations, by clutch situations. He has that elite ceiling, whether you like him or not, whether you get frustrated by the missed games. I'm sure Clippers fans that are listening to this are just, I don't even know how you'd feel about the guy at this point in time, but I just have to give the nod to the talent, and I really love and appreciate Kawhi's game, so I have him here at number 5. And now we're getting into the top tier, right? This is, I mentioned I wasn't going to do too much talk about tiers because this list is a shit show. It's really difficult. You're basically splitting hairs all the way, but while I think there was probably a tier jump from 10 to 9, another one from 7 to 6, and now there's going to be a pretty big tier jump from 5 to 4 because of these are guys that have performed at a very high level on the biggest stage and done so in the past couple years. At number 4, this is where I had Jimmy Butler, right? And you could have this guy as high as number 1 on your list, and I really wouldn't be able to push back too much. But this is where I landed for Jimmy at number 4. 23 points per game in the regular season last year, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 54% shooting from the field, and 35% shooting from deep. As you would expect, those numbers certainly do not jump off the screen as far as the regular season statistics for Jimmy Butler. But again, we know who he is at this point. He's a guy that evolves into a bare minimum top 10, maybe even top 5 player in the entire world when it comes to playoff time. He's somebody that can defend your best player on the other end of the court as well. He's somebody that takes and makes difficult shots. He is an absolute dog in every sense of the word. Love Jimmy Butler. I think obviously, if you're nitpicking his run during the playoffs, he wasn't the same guy after that Milwaukee series. I don't think that's a secret. It was a much more well-rounded team effort, and he really just wasn't the true, top 5. Oh my God, nuclear Jimmy Butler that we saw in that Milwaukee series. But in a lot of ways, he didn't need to be, right? He got to the finals, by getting a little bit of help from guys like Caleb Martin and Gabe Vincent and Duncan Robinson along the way, and of course Bam Adebayo. But that being said, his offensive game just takes a massive leap when you hit the playoffs. He's a guy that is, as probably one of the scariest guys to root against. I can say that firsthand as a Celtics fan who's rooted against him basically what seems like every year the past, several years in the playoffs, right? Jimmy's a dog. I couldn't quite get there above the other top 3 guys in this list, really just because, again, he's as good as he is in the playoffs. You could, kind of ding him a little bit for his regular season performances, right? Miami, was a pretty terrible regular season team last year. Obviously, I know they were the 1 seed the year before, but I just think night in, night out, you get more from the top 3 than you do from Jimmy Butler. But come playoff time, if you wanted to put him at number 1, I wouldn't really be able to say shit about it. Number 3, this is where I had LeBron James. LeBron at number 3 on this list. What is he, 38, 39 years old at this point in time, right? But statistically, last season for LeBron, 29 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, 50% shooting from the field, 32% shooting from deep. Obviously, the 3-ball went on him a little bit. He did only play in 55 games last season, but it's LeBron, man. He's been in so many different battles, right? He's probably really can't debate he's any worse than the second best player all time. He's never going to top Jordan in my book. I can't say never, but he certainly hasn't surpassed Jordan in my book yet. But this is not a LeBron-MJ debate. This is a top 10 wings in the NBA. And look, I know that he's banged up. I think there's a real injury concern for Bron at this point in time that there hasn't been during the first, 16 years of his career at this point. But the fact that he can just pick his spots unlike really anybody else in the NBA and still take over in big games. And honestly, he still is probably a top 3 guy in the entire league at just getting to the basket. The man's pushing 40 years old, and he's still an absolute freight train. There's dudes half his age that can't stay in front of him. He's so strong. He knows his body like the back of his hand, right? He can get to his spot. His post games come along. And the only negative thing you can say about LeBron's game at this point is that the three ball is obviously falling off a little bit. It's probably not where he would want it to be, right? You'd think for his advanced age, if he could just kind of rely on the three ball to get, 9, 10 points a game just from the 3-point line, that would be ideal for LeBron. And it wouldn't even shock me to see him take 700 shots a day all offseason and come back and shoot 38% from three next season. Like, that wouldn't even be that shocking at this point in time. But LeBron's a beast, man. If you have LeBron as the best player or the second best player on your team, you will have a chance to contend for a championship. I was kind of banging the drum for the Lakers a bit around the trade deadline just because I felt like Rob Pelinka finally woke up from his coma and put the traditional pieces around LeBron that you would need, right? Some shooting, some defending, and really that's about it when you have a guy like Anthony Davis already in the building too. The Lakers are going to be a team that people are not going to be sleeping on again heading into next season. If they stay healthy, which is a big if, they will be a top 4 or 5 seed in the West without a doubt, and they'll be a real contender come April, May. And looking forward to seeing LeBron defy Father Time once again next season. Moving on to number 2, this is where I had Kevin Durant. 29 points per game last season, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 56% shooting from the field for an entire season. That's nuts. 40% shooting from 3 as well. Now, Kevin Durant was in headlines, most of last season because, again, he was on the Nets. When were we not talking about the Nets when they had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving? That was kind of a nonstop storyline at the start of last season. Of course, he got traded for one of the largest trade compensation packages ever at the deadline to send him over to Phoenix. But what was kind of lost in translation for all that is the absolutely insane shooting efficiency from Kevin Durant, even by his standards. Like, again, a 50-40-90 season is incredible achievement for really anybody ever, and I know Durant's been in that club before, but again, if he had met the threshold for number of games played, which I think was like 60 games or something like that, he was shooting 56%, he had a 56-40-90 season. Like, absolutely unheard of stuff from Durant. He's still a walking bucket. He can get that mid-range pull-up whenever he wants, no matter who's guarding him, no matter what the situation is. He is easily the best scoring forward we've ever seen in the NBA and probably ever will see. Again, the only thing you want to ding him up on is, again, how many games are you going to get from him? He seems to always have a 20-game injury basically every season the past several seasons. But if he's out there for when it counts for, again, March, April, May, June, if you have Kevin Durant on your team, you're going to have a really great shot to win the whole thing. And it's a huge reason why Phoenix is going to be a powerhouse heading into next season. At number 1, I think we all know who's left on this list. And you can call me a homer. You can say I'm biased. You can say whatever. But I'm unapologetically putting my guy, Jason Tatum, at number 1 on this list. 30 points per game last season, 9 rebounds, 5 assists, 47% shooting from the field, 35% from deep. I love JT. That's no secret. And again, I'm not putting him at number 1 to make some statement, and I'm not saying it's not even close, but I do feel pretty good about where to put him at just based on all the variables of availability. When you take an age into account, like, again, he plays in a lot more games than Kevin Durant and LeBron James. He gives you a lot more during the regular season than a guy like Jimmy Butler. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, like, look, I know that the Celtics got bounced by the Heat. I know they lost to an 8 seed. I know it was an embarrassing fashion for them to crawl all the way back from being down 0-3 just to lose in Game 7. Like, that really sucked. But is it crazy to say that, like, Tatum outplayed Jimmy in that series, I should say? Because I feel like he did, right? Like, again, I don't think it came down to a Tatum versus Jimmy thing that, like, many analysts would believe you to say, and many people in sports media would want you to say, right? Like, you would love to be a clash of these two mega superstars and whatever. But it really just came down to, in my opinion, the lack of production from Jaylen Brown and other role players in the Celtics and the insane production they got from guys like Caleb Martin and Gabe Vincent throughout that series. And Tatum was awesome. Like, Tatum showed me a lot in the playoffs, obviously, when he had, he flipped the switch, if you will. And what was that? That was game 6 against Philadelphia, right? Or game 6 against Philadelphia. He played, basically one of the worst games I've ever seen Tatum play shooting-wise. I think he had missed like 12 consecutive shots in a row or something like that. Just for him to continue to shoot his way out of that slump and have a massive fourth quarter where he took over the game, beat Philadelphia on the road, and then went and dropped 50-something points on their head in Game 7. I think Tatum did take a leap this season. Now, it was just frustrating that the team success didn't exactly correlate with how much better I felt like Tatum was. I know he had big playoff games the season before or the year before on the way to the finals. Like, there's obviously no doubt about that. I just feel like Tatum was considerably better. I feel like he was considerably more invested in these games, and I think he'll continue to get better. Like, that's the scary thing, right? The guy is 25, turning 26, heading into next season. Like, he's gotten considerably better every single year of his career. I am projecting a little bit by putting him above guys like LeBron and Durant and Jimmy Butler. But again, if it's the regular season that we're talking about here, and it's the fact that he does give you more on a night-to-night basis, then, you know, he plays more games than Durant and LeBron, and it just gives you more straight up than guy like Jimmy Butler. I think it just makes sense to put Jason Tatum at number 1 in this list. That's my guy. That's where I'm going to have him. And that just about does it, guys. Again, relatively quick podcast. Hopefully I did not ramble too much on this. We are going to continue to crank out these episodes once a week. Again, my bad for missing a podcast episode last week. I hope you guys will forgive me for not having an episode out on August 1st or whatever, right? There was literally nothing to talk about. But I will continue cranking out these episodes. You could probably expect me to rank the top 10 big men in the NBA heading into next season on next episode. I am still reaching out to some beat reporters, trying to get some people from around the league to give us some inside scoop on what's going down in these front offices, what's going down in these training camps, etc. But before I get up out of here, guys, be sure to follow at Words with Wallace on everything. That includes Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Facebook, wherever you get your podcasts, I am there. Be sure to rate and review the show, share the show, tell a friend, and most importantly, guys, if you're still listening at this point in the podcast, let me know. What do you guys want to see me talk about the rest of this offseason, right? We got some dog days of summer ahead with several more August episodes to crank out. September will be pretty slow as well. I don't expect any major NBA storylines to come out at this point in the calendar year. So just let me know. Do you guys like the rankings? Do you want to see me do, some trade value stuff? Do you want to see me do another tier ranking? What do you guys want to see? You guys have my number. Hit me up or hit me up on any of the podcast socials, and I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.